So I'm going to thank everybody, too, for coming so far. I honestly didn't think it was going to be such a great turnout, and it is. And I have my thoughts kind of randomly scattered out here. And like Mike said, this is supposed to be women's ministry, and people started to show more interest. So I know gardening is now becoming extra popular. So I want to tell you first how this came about. It was a Friday, and I was just kind of working around the house, and you get those pop-up thoughts that aren't your thoughts, and what was said to me was, you should do a women's ministry garden presentation. And I kind of was like, yeah, I should, and just kind of sloughed it off. Well, the next day at church, Colette came up to me and said the exact same words out of the blue. I didn't tell Chris. I didn't tell anybody. So we set a day that day, and it was probably about maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago. So that's why we're here, because God wanted this to happen. So I'm going to say it right off the bat that Chris and I are not expert gardeners. I'm also going to say that what we're going to do today is we're going to do a basic garden talk. This was supposed to be like very entry level gardening type stuff. We're not going to get into any deep things about gardening so much. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the garden talk first, and then we'll go out and we'll tour the garden that we have here and the different plants and stuff, and we'll talk about those things. We'll come back, we'll start to eat, and then I'll do a presentation that Colette asked me to do on sprouting and microgreens as well, okay, and give you a little overview about that stuff. But I'm going to start by saying I want to tell you how we got interested in gardening. And I'll start first. I started when I was a little girl, seeing my dad garden. My dad had a garden out in his backyard. It wasn't big, and he gardened in just about complete sand, which, if any of you are gardeners, you know what that means. He had a lot of trouble with watering, and it was just terrible. The water would beat up on the top, but he did okay. He'd go out and get peat with the boys out into the swamp and get peat moss and add it into his sand. Yeah. Right, he added it into his sand, and there was a guy across the street, Mr. Jenkins. My dad would, go over and say, look at my carrot, it was about yay big. And Mr. Jenkins was like, he lived just about on the swamp, so his soil was amazing. And he'd pull out a carrot that was like this big, that big, and Dad would go home with his tail between his legs, So I wasn't so interested in gardening then, but what I was interested in was going into Dad's garden and taking the carrots before it was time, and the peppers, and he used to get so upset with me. He'd be like, no, you can't. And now that I'm an adult gardener, I understand why that's a problem. But I do. If you plant enough of it, you can take them when they're early too. But so my first real garden as an adult, I had tomato plants in like 5-gallon buckets and stuff outside of my door as I was going on.
Which still counts. If you're at that level, good for you.
Yeah.
Do it.
That's right. So then when I met Chris and I were dating, and I started feeling compelled to garden. I just felt compelled. Not necessarily for the counsel that we had, because I hadn't experienced that so much, I just felt super compelled to garden. So Chris and I had our first garden at my mother's house. It just so happened that I was on a work share program because our company was slowing down. So Chris and I saw each other 4 out of the 7 days a week. So we built a garden out in that sand, okay? We didn't know what we were doing. We had pallets, but you can use anything to garden. You can start anywhere. That's the thing. And you should make it fun. It shouldn't be a chore, or try not to set your expectations too high. Like you need to have this beautiful, perfect garden like Martha Stewart or something. Start small and enjoy what you're doing, because if not, you're going to get discouraged and fall off the edge. So we moved on. Chris and I had that small garden at my mother's house. We made a bunch of mistakes. but we learned a lot. One of the things is I used to go out into the garden. Now, he wasn't there all the time because he was working at times, right? So I would go out in the garden, and, you know, if you're a gardener, you go out and you pick things and you munch on them as you're going. Well, we had jalapeno peppers, and I tested them, and they were never hot. So I got into the habit of going out in the garden and picking a jalapeno and just crunching on it. I'm like, well, these are a real disappointment, you know? So one day, I'm out in the garden, and I grabbed a jalapeno, and I bit into it, and I started crunching like I usually do. My face nearly melted off. It was so hot, and that was a lesson that I learned. I called Chris, and he saved the message for so long. I'm like, the jalapenos are hot. The jalapenos are hot. Because he knew I had been snacking on them. But I learned that until a jalapeno gets a certain size and has what looks like stretch marks, they're called striations. They get mature, and they ripen up, and you get a heat. And usually a garden jalapeno will blow away I'm going to hug you. Will blow away a store-bought, a store-bought something. So, you know, I know there's experienced gardeners here. There's people that have done some gardening. There are people that have never gardened, okay? And there are those that feel as if they're going to kill everything that they touch. But my belief is, people say that there are people with green thumbs. I don't think there's any such thing as a green thumb. It would be like me trying to be an accountant, you know? I don't know what an accountant does, and I can't just step into that. You have to learn a little bit about gardening, and I think people oftentimes get discouraged because they start and they fail. But part of gardening is failure, and you're going to get a lot of it, you know, but you're going to learn as you go. And the more you learn...
Every job I first had, the first day at every job I've ever had, I wanted to quit. It's always been terrible experience the first day. So yeah, when you start gardening, just get into it. And if you kill a plant, oh well, try another one.
Right.
And just keep going. And if all you have is a windowsill, and you regrow some cilantro that you got from the garden or from the store, then do that. Do what you can until you can. If you're doing in buckets, put some holes in the buckets and try it, and start from there. You can do a raised bed or two, whatever. It's just start from wherever you can and do what you can.
That's right.
And notice what happens, and try something different if it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to.
I think the person that has started a garden for the first time and the farmer that's on his tractor and has been there for 50 years are both learning. You never stop learning, and it's kind of like the Bible, and it's not a mistake that God put us in a garden and has given us so many object lessons. I've been out there working in the garden, so many object lessons pop into your head. It's not a mistake, you know? And like we said, there's going to be failures. Don't get discouraged. And don't start too big either, you know? Don't overwhelm yourself.
Oops.
Yeah, I know. And we do that constantly, actually. So, yeah. The thing is gardening has been designed to work, you know? All we have to do is partner with that. We just have to partner and give the plants a little bit about what they need. And yes, different plants need different things, but we don't need to get overwhelmed with that either. You learn as you go. Sometimes you could be growing things. Okay, watermelons, for instance. Watermelons always baffled me. You know, I'd pick them. They look great. I'd pick them. I'd go, come on, let's go. We're going to get our first watermelon several times. Cut it open. It's white. And I'd be, oh, gosh, you know. I know what to do with a watermelon now, but it took me like, you know, a long time of growing watermelons. Probably in the fourth, fifth year of growing watermelons, I finally know when to pick a watermelon and, you know, what makes it ripe. So,
What makes it right?
okay, yeah, and you can ask questions as you go, and I'll try to answer them. And if I can't, then, you know, there are other gardeners here, and if you have any input, please do, okay? What makes a watermelon ripe is there's a tendril. There's the watermelon here, And then you got the very first tendril that comes off that watermelon. When it dries back all the way, and it's dry, then you should be able to, and also the vine should just kind of pop off a little bit easy. And it should also have a lot of weight. As a watermelon gets, you want to give watermelon a lot of water, because that's what it mainly is, until it starts to get to the point where it's
Starts to
yeah.
dry down.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you want to back off on the water, because the sugar content will kind of wash out of it if you keep giving it too much water. So you let that sugar content build up.
What's a tendril?
A tendril is that really curly little vine that comes off. You see them on grapes oftentimes, but you see them on or all kinds of things, actually. Anything that grabs, peas, which I think is so cool, because it's like they got these arms and they know where to grab to. They just grab onto stuff everywhere. You know, it's so cool.
Reminds me of how we're supposed to cling to Jesus.
Right? Right. So I'm going to talk about the different kinds of gardens and some of the pros and cons to them. So you got the classic in-ground garden, which usually that's where most people start off. Although today you see a lot of YouTube videos, you know, a lot of people are doing raised beds and whatnot, but the classic in-ground garden, you till the ground, you know, you're adding compost, but a lot of times you're chasing weeds. And anybody that has an in-ground garden knows that you're going to be on your knees a lot, okay? You're going to be pulling weeds like mad. But it's a great way to garden. But one of the down things is, like, this last 2 weeks we've had so much rain. Your plants are going to suffer for it if you have an in-ground garden, because the ground is getting saturated, you know, and there's no place for that water to go, so that you can drown a plant, okay? We know I was supposed to explain all the different gardens we had. So,
Oh, that's all right. That's
well,
good.
I do want to say one thing. It's like we've had 4 gardens together. We'd get a garden established, and then we'd have to move and restart. So I think God has lined us up with this kind of ministry, and obviously it's growing that way. But anyways, so there's raised bed gardening, and usually those are made out of wood or steel, or a combination of the two. They can be low as this low, or they can be as high as you want. And a lot of times people are looking for ease of care, and that definitely does add to ease of care. And people with mobility problems or elderly people can sit on the edge of the garden and work at it, you know what I mean? Instead of having to get down on your knees, it's real helpful. So
It extends the growing season a little bit as well. The insulation. So
yeah, actually a raised bed will thaw quicker than an in-ground garden. You know, so you'll be able to get as soon as you can work that soil, you can plant stuff out there, certain things. So we do like raised bed gardening. There's container gardening for people that don't have a whole lot of space. There are different kinds of containers. You can plant in just about anything, you know. And it also gives you the opportunity to control the soil, the type of soil that's in there for that particular plant. So that's a bonus, because if not, you know, an in-ground garden, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. There are things called grow bags. I don't know if anybody's seen them. I was going to have a sample here, but I don't have them with me. Do you?
Potatoes in them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. That's a fantastic thing to grow, because anybody that's grown potatoes, you know you never get every potato, right?
I have some in my car.
Do you?
I do.
Grow bags? You want to grab them? Okay. Yeah, they're made of like a felt material. There's a few advantages to those. 1, if you don't have space. 2, again, you can control the soil conditions. 3, roots naturally, obviously, want to be underground, right? When the roots hit the side of the bag, something happens called air pruning, okay? A root doesn't want to see the air. It doesn't want anything to do with it. So when it hits the side of that, it can go through the side of the bag, but it's not going to, because it doesn't want to. It's like a worm seeing sunlight. It's going to go back down on the ground. So what it does is it shoots off lateral roots, and you get a nice big healthy root system underneath. So that's a good advantage of grow bags.
And mobility, if you had to move them, you could move it if you had to.
Yeah, you can follow the sun, and they're even, some of them come even smaller than this, but and they got them probably, well, they got them a lot bigger than that, but twice the size of these, 40 gallons. I mean, you can plant some pretty big plants in there. So
ours have actually little trap doors at the bottom you can lift up so
yes,
you harvest your potatoes. You don't go through the top, you go through the bottom.
Yes, and you can also sneak a potato or two if they're not ready. Like if you want new potatoes, as soon as the potato flowers or you see some of the plants flowering, you know there's new potatoes under there, those little tiny ones. Yeah, so you can lift up that trapdoor and take a couple, put it back. It's not going to harm the plant any. Yeah. So
Do they have grow bags for flowers, like plastic ones you can hang on the side of a shed or something?
they do. They actually have. You ever see those shoe holders that you used to put on the back of a door? They have stuff that's kind of like that, made out of a plastic, and people plant things in them. They have something called, well, I was going to get to that, but they have something called a green stalk planter. That is a vertical planter, and it's round. It's round, and it's got pockets, okay? So you fill all those pockets, going to get several tiers. They have 5 tier 1s, they have 10 tier 1s, and at the top, there's a basin, and there's a hole at every one of those pockets of soil. So you water from the top, you fill it, and they've measured it so there's just enough water that will drain down into each one of those little pockets. And it's a space saver. It's also on wheels, so you could put it on your patio, and you can grow a ton of things in there. Yeah, you're limited to certain kinds of plants, but it's still a great way to grow, you know? So that's a green stalk.
You're limited to how much you can spend for it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're a little expensive. There's hydroponic gardening. I don't know a whole lot about hydroponic gardening, but it's generally a closed system, and you add liquid nutrients to the water. Some people have fish tanks. They actually have their fish tanks plumbed into this system, and the fish waste feeds the plants. So it can be completely enclosed. You can actually, you can feed the fish, or you can get a species of fish that eats like duckweed or something, and you can grow algae or duckweed, and the fish are fed by that, and that stuff multiplies like crazy. And then their waste goes into the water and feeds the plant. And the roots just hang directly into the water. You pull it out, and it's a clean, you just clip the roots off, and off you go. And a lot of people are doing that now, but that is an expensive setup. And if you know what you're doing, you can gather some secondhand stuff and still do it. There's square foot gardening, and I know Peggy's done this. There's square foot gardening. I remember you guys had one at Connie's house, which generally you do in a raised bed, and you literally grid it off into squares, 1 foot squares, and then you put so many of this, so many of that, and then you have all these different varieties of plants growing up next to each other. I haven't had a lot of experience with that. It's just a matter of spacing. And there's something called like a cottage garden, which is kind of like a kitchen garden, but it has medicinals in it, and it also has flowers all mixed in, and edible plants. That's my ultimate thought of a garden, to go out and have flowers and things just cascading everywhere. That sounds good to me. And to be able to put those ones that you've started yourself out there too, like your tomatoes and cukes and everything, and have them all live together. It's great. But there's also food forests and permaculture gardens, which you hear a lot about now if you're interested at all. And these are things that have a lot of perennials inside of them, and they kind of take care of themselves. They grow up. We're talking about nut trees, fruit trees, bushes, things that are going to be there all year round. And some people grow food forests. They make their backyard, so you walk out, and it's like walking out into the woods, but everything feeds you. Okay, and you can also, in the food forest situation, mix in those plants that you've grown yourself too. So you got everything. There's things on the ground. There's things at waist high all the way up to a canopy. and you plant it in such a way that maybe there's a shade-loving plant that you're going to plant under this tree, or something that likes to be planted next to each other. You do that, you know? So everything kind of works in a symbiotic way.
I like that idea.
Yeah, that's nice to just be able to go out, and I like the idea of that too. And then you can just garden on your countertop. They're selling units now that have, and Colette, I believe, has one of these. It has a grow light, and it has a way that you can water it, and there's cups or whatever, and you can grow herbs and smaller, shorter plants, you know, that you'll have that grow light on all the time. Sometimes it's set on a timer. It'll go off automatically, you know, it's set. And it really kind of takes care of itself too. But those are your general choices for gardening. I'm sure there's more outside of that, but and just plant basic needs. Generally, you want a spot that when you're searching out a spot for a garden, you want something that has at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. And that's a general rule. There are exceptions to the rule. There are things that don't want that much sun. But in general, if you're doing a veggie garden, that's basically what you want. 6 to 8 hours of full sun. Water. That's the second thing that's most important. And everybody knows that, but that's one of the biggest mistakes that a new gardener makes is overwatering. You're over-loving the plant, and you really it ends up suffering. Like I said, it washes away nutrients. And generally, you can tell if your soil needs water. If you get up to your second knuckle and it's dry, water. You can also see signs in the plant. You'll see it start to wilt. Some will wilt in the heat of the day anyways, and as it cools down, they'll strengthen back up again like a squash. You know, squash will look like, oh my gosh, my squash is dying. You go out there at nighttime and it's back up again. Certain things just don't like the super hot. And they wilt down. And this, in my opinion, this next thing is the most important thing, and that's soil health. What you want to do is build your soil. That's where most of your success comes from. You want organic matter in that soil, and that being anything that's been alive, you know, plant matter and decomposing wood chips. You don't want to put fresh wood chips on top of the garden because it will leach nitrogen. But if you age them for a couple of years and you lay that on top, that will feed the soil, and also it covers the soil. Soil likes to be covered in general, because if not, the sun's going to blast on it, and there is a whole world under the soil. I mean, you could get into soil biology and talk about the microbes and the mycorrhiza, the fungal activity, and there's like New York City looks tiny compared to what's going on under the ground. And it matters, you know. A lot of people will do a no-till garden because they don't want to disturb that fungal network under there. They just leave the soil the way it is and they add on top of it, okay?
And sometimes that's done with cardboard. Sometimes it's done with other organic matter like straw or hay. Sometimes wood chips, broken down wood chips, and let to cover it.
Yeah. So mulching is a good idea. And like I said, this is the other thing that mulching is good for. It cuts down on your watering. It cuts down on your weeding. It makes your garden take more care of itself. You're not chasing weeds all the time. Will you get weeds? Yes. But you're going to find that when your garden is mulched with a couple of inches, especially like wood chips, hold so much moisture. You just pull on that weed and it comes up like a dream. You know,
you need less water because as it dries out at the top, you water in one spot, let that water go through. The water's not going to evaporate through the other dried spots, and it'll stay watered underneath. So you don't want to water the entire top of the wood chips because that will let all the water evaporate out. So you want to keep part of it dry and just water where you have to get that plant wet. But you won't need to water as much.
Right. It's so good. Once we started using wood chips, it was a game changer.
Like your father did with the peat moss. The peat moss holds the water.
Yes.
And you have it in the garden.
Yeah, it 100% does. And that's another thing that you can add. I mean, there's a lot of controversy around peat moss right now because It's being really taken out of the ground at big rates, and they're not, it's starting to stress the peat moss areas out, which are, things that we want. But I still do use peat moss sometimes for certain things. But there's other things that you can use too. There's coconut coir, which they grind up coconut husks, and it acts the same way. It's inert. It doesn't have any nutrition in it. But so we ask ourselves, why do we want to garden? What are some of the reasons why we want to garden? One is obviously your quality of food. If you've had a store-bought tomato, somebody that I know of has said store-bought tomatoes taste like disappointment.
If you take a store-bought tomato and close your eyes and take a bite, you don't even know what you've got.
That's right. It's true. But when you get your first tomato out of the garden, I mean, it's just like, oh, and that rings true with everything out of the garden. I mean, it just tastes so much better, right? Anybody that's garden knows that. And you can control your pesticide load. You can decide whether you're going to spray or not. And I know there's probably going to be a question, is my garden organic? Is our garden organic? 90% of it, I'd say. It's all grown from seed. Everything out there has been grown from seed besides a few plants that friends have given me. We start everything in our basement or we direct seed. And it's very doable. You just have to be organized. And I never was when I first started, but I've gotten more organized over time. In fact, this is and these are the kind of things that you can do. Is one of the biggest things to know is your first and last frost date. And I put our first and last frost date here. I also had a calendar, okay, to keep. I made a 12-week envelope and so on, all the way down to 1 week before our last frost date. And what I do in the wintertime, when you're in bed and it's all snowy, the seed catalogs start coming. And you start shopping from your cozy room, dreaming about your garden if you're a crazy gardener. I don't know any of those. And what you do is you start planning. What am I going to plant this year? You start ordering your seeds. You know what I mean? You plot out your garden way ahead of time. Because if you wait too long, you're going to be behind the gun. You're always trying to keep up anyways. In fact, I wanted to have this meeting on July 9th because beyond this date, soon you're not going to be able to walk down the aisles of that garden because you get to a point where it just gets away from you. You can't keep up with it. And you just let it go. You can try to keep up with it, but like right now, getting ready for this meeting, you're going to see a lot of overgrown peas out there. Feel free to pick anything you see when you go out. I don't care. Pick whatever you want to pick. If you want to munch on something, go ahead. You can bring it in and wash it. If anybody wants some peas to bring home, knock yourself out. Yeah, bring home. All right, great. We got snows out there and we got snaps. I didn't do any shelling peas this year. But, so yeah, we were talking about soil. I won't stay there for too long, but you got clay soils and sand soils. What you can do, the best thing you can do is get compost and add it to that. Somebody asked me before, can you add leaves to it? Leaves, yes, but you should really shred them up because if you've ever been in the woods and you pick up a patch of leaves, there's just layers and layers of solid slime and leaves that haven't broken down. It takes a while. If you grind them up, no problem. Okay, yeah, you can stick those in your garden. Grass clippings, anything you got. Bill and Jerry blend up their vegetable waste right in a blender and go out and just boom, and their soil is this color. It's just beautiful. Usually when you're growing corn, you need a lot of added nutrition to keep that corn going and really bring it to a full ear. They don't need to do anything. They don't add anything to their soil because they go out and throw that blender full, very faithfully. And it's built their soil over the years to an amazing, they don't add anything, which I think is great. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get elaborate and get compost tumblers and things like that. That actually, it decomposes in the tumbler, And matter of fact, there's one that the liquid from it goes down into a undercarriage, and you take that and undo the stopper and pour out liquid.
Yes, you do, and you can do compost teas, which are really beneficial, that are a big thing to do now. Worm teas, there are people that farm worms, which I have a worm bin down in the basement. When we lived at our last house, now Chris isn't real crazy about letting critters outside of ourself, and even he's a little skittish of Charlie even being in our house, but he let me get worms, and I put them in a bin. And when you first get a worm bin, they want to get out, okay? And what you got to do is take a light and shine it on the bin. So I had it in our kitchen, and you shine the light on the bin, and it had been days. Nobody's coming out. So we had our bedroom upstairs, and I shut the light off that night in the middle of my kitchen floor. So for some reason, I don't know why, I came down that night, and the moonlight was shining, and we had a bathroom upstairs next to our bedroom, but I went to the downstairs bathroom for some reason. I went down, and I could see the floor moving, shiny floor. Well, I had like 5,000 worms. I flip on the light, and I'm like, oh, they're going up the cabinets. They're all over the floor. They're migrating into the bathroom, and I don't think one worm was left inside of that bin. I'm like, Chris. He came down. He's like, oh. Needless to say, that was my last day worm farming. He's like, you got to put them out in the garden. We can't do this. So, yeah, he's a city guy. He actually came from Revere, so all this country stuff is new for him. So yeah, I convinced him to let me have worms again, and they're down inside. We have a grow tent down in our basement and some really strong lights that we use for our place, but the worms are down there. I always have a little light on, so they don't come out. But sometimes they still come out, but not like that. That was an exodus. Yeah, for sure.
So what do you grow them and then take some of them, put them in your garden, and then they continue to multiply?
No, I don't usually put them in my garden. They do multiply, but they have a life cycle, and they just naturally die off and go into the soil, right? But the reason that I keep worms is because of worm castings, which is worm poop, essentially, right? It's fantastic. That's what they do naturally out in our garden. If you have real healthy soil, you move it around. Like underneath our wood chips, if I move it, seriously, I can find like my first scoop, 5 worms. There's just worms just packed inside of that garden. So it's kind of like a hobby for me. I don't mind touching worms. You know, I go down there and give him a cantaloupe and, oh, look, and move him around. And he just makes sure that I wash my hands when I come back up.
How did you get the 5,000 worms back in the box?
One at a time. Me, I did it. I just picked them. I just kept picking them. That's all I could do. What are you going to do? You know, I can't sweep them up. No.
We tried to
Poor
move,
little
but
bodies.
she wouldn't let me.
Yeah. Because, it wasn't
Let's
good.
just move.
I know. we make food in this room. Yeah. So we were talking about why we want to garden, the quality of food. You can control your pesticide if you're going to even use it. And like I said, I will try to do things naturally, and it depends on the time that we have. Do we have much time? Especially not now because we do treatments and stuff. We really don't have a lot of time. In fact, I had to stay home for a couple of weeks just to organize all this and get this going. So there are certain crops that get inundated. There's something called a cucumber beetle that is relentless, especially here. And it's a beautiful little bug. It's black and yellow striped. Yeah, and they will eat your plants. They'll grow. They'll lay eggs underneath them, and you just can almost not control them. Okay, and you can use neem oil, cold pressed neem oil, mixed with Bronner's soap, which is a Castile soap. You can blend garlic into it. You can put cayenne pepper powder in it. You spray it all on there, and you work to spray it. You got a big garden. There's a lot to spray. They go after squash, they go after watermelon, they go after cantaloupe, they go after cucumbers, and they will decimate your plants if you let them. There's squash bugs, same thing. When I was sick, I let the squash go, and I am not kidding. We probably had easily 10,000 squash bugs. They were just everywhere. You walked on them and you squashed them. So by letting that happen, they kind of look like a stink bug. Stink bug. That's what they look like. And these bugs, you go to squish them and they move. You know, it's like they see you coming and they move. Cucumber beetles and squash bugs they're just so good at moving away from you if you try to squish them. So, yeah, I will spray. When I get to a certain point, I will spray, and I use 7, and it's toxic. And I use it, and I've probably used it twice in the growing. Last year, I sprayed the raspberries, because they got inundated with wasps. These raspberries, depending on how you prune them, will give you 2 flushes, okay? You get the early one, which is pretty good. And then you get Japanese beetles to wrestle with. You know, you're wrestling with pests a lot. You're always fighting pests, whether they be the fuzzy cute kind or the insect kind, you know? You got bunnies and groundhogs, and it's just, woodchucks, right? Deer. The good thing you can do for deer can jump over 6 feet easily. I've heard of deer jumping 10 feet. But if they don't have any place to land on the other side, they won't jump. So if you have a full garden, they're not going to jump. They have no place to jump in that garden. There's nowhere for them to land. And we do have deer. We have bear. And they don't have any place to jump to. So we can get away with a 6-foot fence. No problem. Let's see. Where are we? So you can also control. A lot of people are concerned with GMOs for good reason, right? A lot of people are wanting to do organic everything as much as they can. I've been told, and I'm not 100% positive of this, but they can't sell GMO seeds to us as far as gardening goes. You might want to research that one, but everybody says non-GMO, 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 but I think it's a industry standard that they're not supposed to sell GMO seed. I don't think it's gotten that far. But like I said, you can double check me on that. So also, you can control the varieties. And if you've ever seen, when you do get that seed catalog, we have like a fraction of what is available for food in our grocery stores. We're used to the very same things all the time. There's 10,000 varieties of tomatoes. Did you know that? 10,000 different varieties of tomatoes. And that's across the board. Everything has so many. Maybe more tomatoes have been developed because people, love tomatoes. They thought they were back at the World's Fair is when they started eating tomatoes, because nobody would eat them before because they thought they were poisonous. But it was the lead plates that they were eating them off of that were hurting and killing people.
They're part of the nightshade family, which is poisonous.
Yes.
But only if you eat the leaves of the tomatoes. Them are poisonous.
Right.
The fruit.
And if you're a hornworm, that doesn't count. Hornworms. No, they're decimating.
Those are gross.
They're disgusting. They really are. I brought one in.
The thick ones?
Super thick. They're about that thick, green.
Here the teeth go up.
Yeah, they're nasty.
And they've got this horn on their head. Yeah.
Yes.
Or the tail, I think it is. But
Yeah.
it's that long.
Yep. And it looks like they have eyes going down the side for predators. But you can go outside at nighttime if you want to get rid of your hornworms. They sell black light flashlights, or get an extension cord, bring it out, get a black light, shine it, and they glow at nighttime. So you can just go picking all your hornworms because they're wicked hard to find on a tomato plant.
Especially during the day, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. They just blend in with everything. But they will decimate. And you can also know that you have them besides the holes in your plants. They leave big poops all over your leaves. You'll see that you have a hornworm problem. So there's the varieties. You get to choose. And it's like, shopping in the wintertime is so exciting. I probably get like 10 catalogs sent to me, and I'm just going from catalog to catalog, and $300 later, I have a seed addiction problem. I really do. It's bad. Some women collect shoes. I collect seed. So there's food safety to some degree too, and I'm talking not only do you have food out in your backyard, because you're seeing food shortages now. Go into the grocery store, you're seeing a lot of one product filling up spaces, Those are big things that are sticking out now. We saw during COVID completely empty shelves. You know, that's a very big reality now. Will you be able to have enough food to feed your whole self? Not without quite a sizable garden and a lot of organization and hard work. It's hard to totally feed yourself off of a garden. You know, you can.
But God can multiply your efforts.
That's right. Loaves and fishes, loaves and fishes. So there's food shortages, and you can help yourself and you can help others. And it's awesome, too, because when you have a garden, it's so nice. I find that gardeners are very helpful to each other. You know, you share a lot of knowledge with each other. And also sharing your food with neighbors, it opens doors to witnessing. You know, where doors wouldn't be open before. Everybody has food in common. You can just walk up and talk. And I remember my dad would sit and talk about gardening for hours with people. And I never quite understood it, but now I can sit down and do the same thing. I remember when I first got to Athol, I prayed that God would introduce me to an experienced gardener because I really wanted to dig in. And that guy right there in the blue t-shirt is who God introduced me to. He used to actually be the head of a horticultural department program, right? Where did you? At Weimar. So he ran the horticultural department. And it wasn't too long after that prayer that I met him. And I started talking about gardening or something. And he's like, oh, I did this and that. I'm like, you're the guy that God was introducing me to. All right, you're my gardener. And that's how we became friends. We met. We met and we started talking about that. But there's other reasons to garden. And my talk is almost over. Gardening.
Interesting, actually.
Is it? Good. Good. I wasn't sure if I had enough to talk about, but I could just talk all day. Gardening promotes health and well-being. Yeah. It lowers stress and anxiety unless you make it a chore and you get freaked out by your weeds and whatever, you know, but it does. It literally, wait a second. Yeah, your stress and anxiety, it's gratifying to plant something, tend something, and harvest it. You get to see it from the seed you put into the ground. Every year I grow a garden, right? And every year I think nothing's going to grow. You know what I mean? It's not going to come up. And then I find myself in mid to late July just about getting a machete to get through the garden, you know, because everything's so big. It's like, wow, it worked again, you know? So it also creates structure. It makes you accountable to something, you know? You're only going to get out of it what you put into it. So, and it's hard work and it's good work and it's proven, and Mike says this all the time, soil raises the level of serotonin and dopamine. Those are chemicals that boost your immune system and make us happy. So we literally, if you're a Bible reader at all, you know that we're made from dust. We're essentially made from dirt. A lot of what we're made up of is right under our feet. You know, so having that contact with the soil is really beneficial to us. And I have one quote that I'm going to read from an author that we're very fond of. It says, in the cultivation of the soil, the thoughtful worker will find that treasures little dreamed of are opening up before him. No one can succeed in agriculture or gardening without attention to the laws involved. The special needs of every variety of plant must be studied. Different varieties require different soil and cultivation. In compliance with the laws governing each of the condition is the success that you'll attain. The attention required in transplanting, that not even a root fiber shall be crowded or misplaced. The care of young plants, the pruning and watering, the shielding from frost at night and sun by day, keeping out weeds, disease, insects, pests, the training and arranging not only teach important lessons concerning the development of character, but the work itself is a means of development. In cultivating carefulness, patience, attention to detail, obedience to law, it imparts a most essential training. The fourth, in the constant contact with the mystery of life and the loveliness of nature, as well as the tenderness called forth in ministering to these beautiful objects of God's creation, tends to quicken the mind and refine and elevate the character. And it does. It really gives us something positive.
We put straw on top of our raised bed around the tomatoes and everything.
Yeah.
What do you do later? Do you take that off at the end of the season or you work it in?
It'll break down. You can leave it over winter and then maybe just push it into the soil. Straw doesn't add a whole lot of nutrition, but it definitely does mulch. You have a tendency to get some weeds from straw. Hay is a little bit more nutritious for the soil to break down, you know. But even if you have a compost that has a lot of maybe broken down wood chips in it, I have a really nice compost, and I'm going to show you guys what a good compost looks like. When you smell it, it shouldn't smell of, it's not bad to put cow manure on your stuff, but it shouldn't smell of manure. It shouldn't smell of food or rotting decay. It should be completely earthy and almost a little sweet, or not sweet, but it just shouldn't smell like what it was before. It should be completely broken down. But you want to have some sort of stuff that still is breaking down inside of it too. You know, that being more so the wood chip stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a garden at our job. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, we do. The boss let us. He let us build some raised garden beds out front, and we try to keep them looking decent. I try to plant flowers in there too. I don't have a lot of experience with flowers, but I'm doing. We have edible flowers out there, which I was hoping that some of the stock flowers would last because I was going to put it in a. Yeah, I was going to put it in a salad so you could taste some flowers, but we got nasturtium out there that are just starting. You know, everything's a little bit late because of the lack of sun and, you know, all this rain that we have. So everything's a little bit behind.
I hate to be a little bit thick, but those envelopes in your late frost date,
Yeah,
I'm not understanding what that means.
I'll show you.
To plant.
Yes, I didn't fully explain it. Sorry about that. But
It's just when you.
so say I'm just going to give a date. Well, I can give you a date. April 30th to May 14th. This is the Tully Lake area. You can have something called microclimates. Now, this is getting a little bit deeper into stuff. You basically want to figure out what your grow zone is, and that'll give you a general, right? But it can go even further than that. Maybe you're up on a hill. Maybe you're down in a basin. Things are going to affect. Weather's going to affect. There's a lot of things that affect things. But you get your general last frost date, and this is ours, between April 30th and May 14th. That will also dictate what you can grow, because you get your first and your last, you add up how many days, say you got 140 days in your growing season, but you're going to grow an onion that takes 180. You can't grow that onion inside of your growing season because you don't have enough time. So when you're looking for seeds, you know, as a general rule, know how many days you got in your growing season generally. And you know, weather doesn't cooperate all the time. It just doesn't. That's the other thing about gardening is you're just always, things are changing.
We had a late frost this year.
Oh,
It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to
remember
be
that
done
hard
by-
freeze we got after it was like 80?
I do.
So go ahead.
I got lucky.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's
It's
not.
hot.
Things will change and stuff like that. But you want to plant. You have so long to plant. If you have 60 days for something to grow, and you have 180 days out here, then you're going to be able to do one or two growths of that particular plant. But like Amanda's saying, if you have 100 days to grow out between your first frost and your last frost, and you have something that takes 120 days to grow, you have to either plant it inside for 20 days or 30 days, or try to find a way where you can cover it outside somehow. But these envelopes will show.
That's what I.
These envelopes
Yeah.
will say
12 weeks mean.
Okay, this is when we're going to start planting, February 19th to the 25th. This is 12 weeks away from our first frost date. We can't plant anything in the ground, so it's 12 weeks around that time.
and these are the things that we'll have to grow
Inside.
inside that
Inside,
week in order to be able to plant them out here when it's after the frost.
the right time comes. So they'll be around the right size down in that grow tent if we plant them 12 weeks out, which is generally onions, peppers, which take more time to develop and stuff like that.
12 weeks before your last frost date.
Yes.
Now you-
And then you're 11, so you put your plants in there, and you just, as you do that, every week you got an envelope. All right, what am I going to plant this week, you know? And you get ready, and I found this to be, and this is the first year that I've done this. Usually, I have a calendar, or I even made a map of the garden this year. I have a big cardboard thing, and it's just about to scale. And because you forget where you plant stuff too. When you start putting seeds in the ground, yeah, you can't see it and you forget where it is. So you need little markers, you need reminders. And this was a great way. We had a bunch of these mailing envelopes and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this. And it worked great. I just kept it on my desk and I grabbed an envelope. And if I was behind, I also had things on my phone. I was way organized this year.
It's a nice idea to change where you grow. If you don't always say, this is my tomato growing spot. Grow the tomatoes here. Maybe next year you go put the beans there to put more nitrogen in to change things up. And the bugs try to trick the bugs. So that's where the tomatoes are supposed to be. So you make it a little harder for them to find what you have.
Yeah, and some species will actually overwinter under your soil. So they're living there under the soil. And you go to plant that plant again, they're just going to live next to their food source, right? Yeah, so they're going to come up and their food source isn't going to be there. So, yeah.
It's good to rotate all the time.
Yes.
Because one plant takes off a certain nutrient. If you plant it there all the time, it's going to keep doing that one nutrient.
Right.
If you take another plant and put it there, it takes a different nutrient and puts back that other nutrient.
Right. And beans are, like Chris said, they're nitrogen fixers. And I know a lot of people are nitrogen, but that's not the whole of what makes a plant grow. You hear about NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and potash or phosphorus. Those are the big three that the farming industry soaks are usually with chemicals versions of it. But you can find that in different versions, We don't have, besides composted manure into our compost, we don't have any animal products. Everything is like kelp meal, alfalfa meal. We have probably 10 or 12 different amendments that we might put inside of the garden to build it up in the fall. You leave it, it starts to break down, but they're usually slow release. And I use something called black soldier fly frass, which is basically the poop of a black soldier fly. And it's a little bit harder to find a good nitrogen source if you're not using a manure or, we do have manure inside the compost, but it's broken down. That's not super high. I think you found a friend now. He's starting to like you a lot. So go ahead, Mike.
Some farmers actually do a Sabbath every 7 years. There's a plot where they grow nuts.
I imagine they do. I imagine if it's a Christian farmer, and I know that farmers will leave their fields fallow. I don't know if they go on a 7-year cycle like you'd find in the Bible. But yeah, they do.
They'll section it off and then rotate the one that they're.
Yes.
You have to have a lot of
Yeah. It's really for the best interest of the plant because you can, like Dave was saying, you can zap the nutrition out of the soil. And there are plants that are very hungry plants, heavy feeders. You got tomatoes, potatoes. There are certain plants, watermelons are heavy feeders. Eggplants are heavy feeders. Meaning, okay, I haven't fertilized our garden in probably 3, maybe 4 weeks because I've been neglecting the garden because I've been thinking about this stuff and doing other things, right? So some things are suffering. But generally there are heavy feeders that will suck stuff out of the ground. After potatoes, you don't want to put potatoes, especially, twice in the same spot because they just suck so much nutrition out of the ground. And like you have the right idea putting them in grow bags. I don't think I'll ever put a potato in the ground again unless I have to because we always miss it. Me and Tammy went through a whole bed. Like meticulously pulling every potato out last year. She came to help me. And this year, gardeners have what are called volunteers. They just come up on their own. You'll never get all your potatoes. Whoever does, I congratulate them. Because there's always a potato left in the ground that'll grow up. And maybe you have a nice plant that you don't want disturbed. And here comes this monstrous potato. You'll see how big potatoes get. So that will take over your little spot. So I've been pulling up those rogue potatoes, and now we're doing them in grow bags. So I don't know if anybody else has any questions. We can actually.
In the wintertime, do you put a cover crop on?
Yes, we've just started doing that. We've had cover crop seeds that we've had in my gardening cabinet and in my seed collection for a while.
What do you use?
Clover, rye, there's all kinds of stuff. You know,
I use winter rye.
yeah, clover is a nitrogen fixer. You can just, they call them green manures. You can actually, as they grow, you just till them into the ground or push them into the ground and they'll put nutrition in. You know, those different ways that you can get nitrogen and other things, you know.
It's another way not to leave your soil bare.
Yes.
You can put it
Which,
in a grow bed too?
yes, you can. Yeah, of course you could. Yep. Yeah, you can do it on any scale. But I figured we'd take a walk around the place and show you guys. And like Chris said, watch your step.